Hi, this is Jack Fonseca from Campaign Life Coalition. To the more than 11,000 Campaign Life supporters who responded to our call to join the Conservative Party of Canada in order to be eligible to vote in the leadership race, we'd like to say thank you and congratulations on a big win. Pro-life and pro-family CPC members scored a huge victory in the Conservative leadership contest. While most pro-lifers are still focused on who won, that isn't really the big picture. Of course, it's great to have a leader with a pro-life voting record because it brings hope for a more open environment towards pro-life bills and policies than what we had under Harper. Only time will tell, however, if that materializes under the new leader, Andrew Scheer. But that's not actually the most important thing that happened on May 27th. By far, the greatest victory was accomplished by Brad Trost and Pierre Lemieux. What these two outspoken candidates achieved was a game changer for social conservatives in the party and across Canada. When the first ballot results came up on screen, showing Trost in 4th place and Lemieux in 6th out of 14 candidates with a combined 16% of the total first choice ballots, everything changed for the pro-life, pro-family wing of the party. It was a watershed moment for social conservative, pro-life, pro-family party members, which left the media and party establishment in utter shock, but forced to admit that social conservatives are indeed a pillar of the Conservative Party and deserving of respect. They could not help but acknowledge this fact, since the vote transfer from Trost and Lemieux after dropping off the ballot is what crowned pro-life MP Andrew Scheer as leader. Thanks to Lemieux and Trost, our values instantly acquired a newfound respectability within the party when those first ballot results became visible. Although the Lemieux and Trost campaigns had been building up respectability throughout the campaign, it was in that defining moment that it truly became acceptable across the party to hold and espouse pro-life and pro-family values. Pierre and Brad have given us for the first time a true seat at the table where we can exert influence, and also they've given us a much more credible voice within the CPC than we've ever had in the history of the party or any of the legacy parties that formed today's Conservative Party. Now, I'm going to flesh this out a bit to help you, our supporters, understand just how groundbreaking a development this is. Before Trost and Lemieux entered the race, the liberal media and the party establishment had written off social conservatism as dead, a totally spent force. They believed it would never again find a voice in any of the country's conservative parties, whether provincial or federal. They expected to happen to the federal Conservatives the same thing that happened to Ontario's PC Party, in which Patrick Brown declared his allegiance to the LGBT Tories, marched in a gay pride parade, and attempted to redefine the provincial PC Party as, quote, socially liberal, end quote. The CPC establishment and the mainstream media anticipated watching that same transformation of the federal Conservative Party unfold during the leadership race. Their script was already pre-written. The establishment just knew in their bones that the party was going to become socially liberal, like their Ontario PC cousins. All of them had written off pro-life and pro-family values as relics of history from a bygone era never to be seen again. And I don't believe I'm far off the mark by speculating that virtually all of the people who were considering entering the race as candidates anticipated much the same thing. I believe the prospective leadership candidates were prepared to relegate pro-life and pro-family issues to the dustbins of history and to banish social conservatives to the farthest outskirts of the party, only to call upon them at election time with the usual pitch for donations and votes. But then something happened. Along came Brad Trost. He announced his candidacy in September 2016 and exploded onto the scene, smashing the establishment's happy little progressive bubble. Out of the gate, Brad Trost's campaign message focused on fighting for Canadians who believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. His very first interview on CTV announced not one, but 2 pieces of government legislation to protect unborn children from abortion violence. Trost articulated his principled convictions with confidence, with pride, without any apologies. He held these principles out as core conservative values. He brought them up at every turn and continued to steadily sell memberships to Canadians who likewise identified. Next, Pierre Lemieux entered the race on November 29th, adding a second powerful social conservative voice, bursting with charisma, positivity, and persuasive messaging on life issues, free speech, and family values. At every leadership debate throughout the campaign, Trost and Lemieux spoke incessantly and unapologetically about life issues, family values, and the rightful place that social conservatives deserve within the party. Lemieux and Trost connected with traditionally principled voters who in reality represent at least 40% of the party's base. They spoke directly to those of us who are tired of being told to shut up and be quiet. They connected with grassroots conservatives and other Canadians not currently in the party who are fed up with being mocked for having religious or moral convictions. And then, at one point in the race, an amazing thing happened. Many of the other candidates were dragged to the right by Trost and Lemieux. They recognized that Trost and Lemieux were connecting with the grassroots of the party and realized that it was no fringe that they were speaking to, but rather a sizable portion of the membership. So they shifted as best as they could to the right, closer to Trost and Lemieux's positions, at times copying their policies and other times reaching out verbally, directly to social conservatives during all candidate debates. For example, during the Edmonton and Ottawa debates, the pro-abortion MP Stephen Blaney singled out his friends Brad Trost and Pierre Lemieux for special respect and of course in an attempt to curry favor with their pro-life supporters. And he suggested that as leader, he would welcome people with pro-life, pro-family views. We also witnessed a dramatic rightward shift by lifelong social liberal Maxime Bernier, who started to put out very strong socially conservative policy positions. With Bernier, one could palpably observe the influence of Trost and Lemieux shaping the narrative of the leadership race to one in which pro-life and pro-family values were no longer something to run away from, but principles to be embraced and promoted in one's platform, if you hope to win. After Lemieux and Trost pledged to repeal Trudeau's transgender ideology bill, C-16, Bernier announced the exact same policy. The frontrunner suddenly announced that he recognized that the gender identity bill represents a threat to free speech in Canada. Not only did Bernier promise to repeal C-16, but he said he regretted having voted in favor of it during the third reading, and that if the vote were held again today, I would vote against it, he said. And that's a quote. Bernier also joined Trost and Lemieux as the only candidates willing to reopen the abortion debate, telling reporters he would reopen it if that's what his caucus wants. In a campaign email blast, the pro-choice Bernier explicitly condemned Trudeau's pledge of $650 million taxpayer dollars to fund abortions in Africa, and he repeatedly welcomed a private member's bill on abortion, going so far as to say that he would encourage it to be brought forward, and saying that he might even vote in favor of such a bill, depending on the wording. Of course, Bernier is a politician, and it's legitimate to question whether these remarkable turnarounds in policy in the socially liberal MP may have been simply an insincere ploy that would have been abandoned after securing the leadership a la Patrick Brown. However, what's not in question is that Bernier's dramatic shift to the right was exclusively thanks to the unapologetic social conservative campaigns of Lemieux and Trost. And I would bet a lot of money that none of these policy shifts would have occurred without Trost and Lemieux. And you want to know something else? I personally believe that had Bernier not marched in the Gay Pride Parade last year, he would be the Conservative Party leader today. In spite of the good policies by Bernier, a lot of social conservative voters simply couldn't trust him because of his gay pride marching and his vocal opposition of traditional marriage at last year's Vancouver Policy Convention. In another example, an extremely liberal candidate to whom we can credit Lemieux and Trost for going out of his way to attract pro-life and pro-family voters, was Rick Peterson. Peterson identified as proudly pro-choice on abortion, pro-euthanasia, and anti-traditional marriage. Really about as left-wing as you can get. Shortly after Brad Trost's campaign promises to never march in a homosexual pride parade and to make Canada the most adoption-friendly country in the world, Peterson responded by doing what? By copying some of Trost and Lemieux's policies. On March 29th, Peterson sent a campaign email blast promising that if he became leader and prime minister, his government would implement Trost's pro-adoption policy. It would bring in government legislation to ban sex-selective abortion, and it would allow free votes on abortion. Peterson promised, quote, tolerance and respect for pro-life and pro-family views, and for the people who hold them. Now get this, Peterson even slammed Kevin O'Leary for announcing at the Montreal debate that, quote, the party under his leadership would only tolerate progressive views, end quote. Now, wow, that is just amazing from an avowed pro-choice, pro-LGBT leadership candidate, and it happened because of Trost and Lemieux's moral leadership. Even the worst social liberal of the bunch, O'Leary, realized he made a big mistake in declaring war against the party's pro-life, pro-family membership base, and he tried to walk it back later, saying, quote, I'm Irish Catholic. If you're a pro-life person, I've got your back, end quote. Of course, nobody trusted him after having seen him swear to transform the CPC into a pro-abortion, pro-marijuana, pro-gay activist party. It was simply too late for walking back his promise to suppress social conservatives, and therefore voters still viewed O'Leary as public enemy number one, and of course he subsequently dropped out of the race altogether. In my opinion, the eventual winner, Andrew Scheer, was also forced by the presence of Trost and Lemieux to beef up his rather bland platform with some red meat for the pro-life and pro-family voters. Now let me explain why I believe that is. Scheer disappointed a great many pro-lifers by kicking off his campaign with a press conference in which he pledged to follow Harper's policy of not reopening the debate on abortion or homosexual marriage. It was a promise he would go on to repeat many times throughout the campaign. Even after Justin Trudeau enraged the pro-life community by announcing that the Liberals would funnel $650 million Canadian taxpayer dollars to pay for abortions in Africa, Scheer did not join his pro-life colleagues, Trost and Lemieux, in publicly condemning the overseas abortion funding. Whereas Trost and Lemieux immediately pounced with public statements attacking Trudeau's abortion funding, Scheer remained publicly silent. Now, he may very well have told individual pro-lifers that he was unhappy about the abortion funding. We don't know. But he did not make any major public statement like Lemieux and Trost did. From the outside looking in, it appeared as if Scheer wanted to just coast through the campaign and avoid controversial issues like abortion. As the campaign wore on, however, Trost and Lemieux's growing appeal to social conservatives and at times their criticism of Scheer for not being vocal on our issues forced the latter, in my opinion, to beef up his platform with some attractive policies to try to excite social conservatives. Just 3 days after being called out by the Trost campaign for not being socially conservative enough, the Scheer campaign finally spoke out against Trudeau's $650 million abortion funding. Now, it wasn't through a direct statement from Scheer himself, but in the form of an email from pro-life MP Arnold Viersen saying that Andrew opposed the $650 million expenditure. This first public comment on behalf of Scheer actually came out a full 30 days after Trost and Lemieux's condemnation of the Liberal spending plans, which is evidence suggesting that Scheer's hand was forced by the Trost campaign. Then, 2 weeks after the Trost campaign criticism, Scheer announced a very worthwhile policy of cutting off federal funding to universities that do not sufficiently respect freedom of speech. Now, this was a welcome announcement given the growing censorship on university campuses of pro-life student clubs, for example, and of guest speakers like Dr. Jordan Peterson, who oppose gender identity theory. We see this great policy announcement as a direct result of Scheer having his feet held to the fire by the Trost campaign. Of course, he was also feeling pressured by the fact that Campaign Life Coalition was withholding endorsement of Scheer's candidacy over his campaign promise to not reopen the abortion debate, and of course competition for votes with the Lemieux campaign as well. Now, it seems very clear to me that the competition with Lemieux and Trost for social conservative votes is what forced Scheer's hand. Scheer felt he had to sweeten the pot for social conservatives with enough policy reasons, including this university defunding one, plus a couple of others, to rank him high on their ballots. It would seem that his campaign didn't want to take the chance that his past voting record alone would attract sufficient support from pro-life, pro-family voters. So, for those of you who like Scheer's university funding policy, as I do, you probably owe a debt of gratitude to Trost and Lemieux for that one. Those are just a few visible examples during the leadership race where one saw Brad and Pierre shaping the policies of other campaigns in a positive direction. From Blaney to Bernier to Peterson to Scheer, we saw it happen throughout this leadership campaign. Now, in the next video, I'm going to explain how this victory can be broken down into 4 subcategories of wins or successes for the cause of life, family, free speech, and religious freedom. Thank you for watching. God bless you, and God bless Canada.